Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. Today's episode is brought to you by HabitMinder. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Vitici. Happy Friday, Federico.
Hello, John. Happy Friday to you as well.
It's been a different kind of week for you. You've actually, I want to jump straight into everything here, Federico, and talk about your special trip into the heart of Rome, right on Via del Corso there in the heart of Rome. I'm jealous. Your trip looked like a lot of fun. What were you doing in Rome?
Well, you've been there. You've seen the street where Silvia and I went. So this was the first time that Silvia and I were able to visit the center of Rome since the pandemic started, really. The last time we've been there was October 2019 when we did the photo tour to show off the iPhone 11's camera features.
Wow. That feels like so long ago. And I didn't realize it had been even longer for Silvia being in the heart of Rome than it was for me, because I was there a few months after that with you.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like, I mentioned this before, it's not the kind of place where we go all the time because it's nearby, but it's still a whole thing, right? You got to park your car and it's full of people. It's you got to plan the day, basically, if you want to visit the center of Rome. So yeah, this was the first time, and we were there because we were able to visit the brand new Apple Via del Corso store before the grand opening to the public. And we were able to go in, take a tour of the store, take a lot of pictures. Silvia actually took all of the pictures in the story that I prepared for the website. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun. This is a brand new store that, as I explained in the article, Apple took over Palazzo Marignoli, which is this historical building dating back to the 19th century. So this was built somewhere around, I believe, 1873. And over the decades, over the centuries, it was used for different purposes. And in addition to being the original residence of the Marignoli family, it later became one of the two most popular cafes in Rome, called Caffè Aragno. And Caffè Aragno used to be like this gathering place for writers, artists, journalists, politicians, because of the location is also very close to the Chamber of Deputies here in Rome.
Right.
And so a lot of politicians would go there. And it was sort of this kind of, they call it a literary cafe, where all kinds of artists would meet and have a drink and talk about art and politics and, current events, basically. And there's a lot of fun anecdotes about Caffè Aragno that I chose a couple of them and I mentioned them in the story. But really what Apple has done here is they have completely restored and revived the place. Because after Caffè Aragno closed in 1955, so after World War II, basically, it became this fast food restaurant chain. And I can tell you, that chain was there for about 50 years.
Wow.
And I remember being a kid in the late 90s, and whenever we would come to visit Rome, my parents would take me to that place, right, to what used to be once Caffè Aragno, and what later became this chain called Autogrill. An Autogrill in Italy is usually like this highway restaurant chain, right? Like you're traveling and you stop on the highway and there's a bunch of these places, right? And they are open 24/7 so that if you're driving at night, you can drink an espresso, for example, you can stay up and stay alert. That's the idea of the Autogrill chain. But they also had a location in the center of Rome, and it was basically like a pizza chain, right? So the idea was you go to the center of Rome, and rather than go to like one of these touristy places, you go there, it's cheap, you grab a slice of pizza, you eat some fries, you drink some Coke, and you spend, like 10 euros, right?
Right.
And it was extremely convenient for families with kids and also teachers who had a bunch of students on school trips. And so you can imagine this place was extremely gross and loud and dirty, right? And
sure. I know exactly the kind of place you're talking about.
Yeah. And I don't have a great memory of that place, just that it was cheap and convenient and extremely central. But Apple took over. So this place, it closed. The restaurant chain, it closed in 2014. And basically for the past 5 years, Apple has been working on this place. And they restored Palazzo Marignoli to its original glory. So they did First of all, this deep cleaning of the facade to bring back the original color.
Right. Yeah. You see the old pictures. It was even the outside of the building was just grimy and old, right? Looking.
Yes. But inside, it's really incredible what they've been able to do. It feels more like a cross between a museum and a sort of luxury hotel in the center of Rome. That's the kind of feel that you get. Apple restored, thanks to a team of local restorers, they restored 2 original ceiling paintings dating back to the early 20th century. They restored 6 graffiti by another Italian artist. This graffiti used to be shown off at Caffè Aragno, so these are dating back to the 1950s. They entirely redid this incredible hand-painted ceiling in the upper floor, and it's really incredible. That sits above the Genius Bar, and they basically have rebuilt, redone all the walls, the colonnade, the courtyard, which is actually dating back to the 16th century, back when Palazzo Marignoli, before it was called Palazzo Marignoli, used to be a monastery. And they use Carrara marble throughout the whole building. So as soon as you step in, you see this ceiling that is like 6.5 meters high, and everything is very white and bright and shiny. It's really an incredible effect. So go check out the photos in the story. We're going to have a bit more details, a bit more background on the trip to the store in the upcoming episode of MacStories Unplugged for Club MacStories members, which will be out on Monday. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to share a bit of the backstories, how we took the pictures, so the workflow that we had, a bunch of anecdotes on Monday in MacStories Unplugged. But if you just want to see the photos, they are all available in the article on MacStories.
Yeah, you really shouldn't miss these photos because they're really fantastic. Sylvia did a great job, and Apple has done a fantastic job just restoring this building. I think my favorite parts, it's really hard to pick particular things, but those restored ceiling paintings are really amazing, as is the grand staircase that was restored and that courtyard. I really think those 3 things are some of my favorites.
Yeah.
All right, Federico, this week we got more information about WWDC, and it's not, there's not a lot of surprises here. I mean, one of the things we got was the actual dates and times for some of the main events. So the keynote is going to be on Monday, the 7th of June at 10 a.m. Pacific, which is what it has always been as long as I've been following WWDC.
Yeah.
And then the state of the platforms talks are going to be at 2 p.m. Pacific that same day. The ADAs have a date and a time now. So I guess there's going to be a video stream of that, which is new. Those have just been, at least for the last few years, just kind of announced at some point during the conference. I believe that's a couple of days later. Is it Thursday the 10th? I want to say. I think that's correct. And then the format sounds like it's largely the same as last year. Apple is doing something called pavilions, which are a way to organize things around certain topics. So the streaming videos, news, and other aspects of the conference are going to be organized into pavilions by topic. So it'll be interesting to see what that is. But that's to me, that sounds more like a naming change than an actual change, but it is a good way to organize things by topic. So there's that. We also got this week some changes to the developer forums. And the developer forums, if everybody remembers, were completely revamped last year. And they it was a change for the better, but there were still things that could be improved. And Apple's done some of that this year, although I think there is still room to do even more. One of the things that was changed is that you can now follow tags for specific topics, and those tags have RSS feeds, so you can actually subscribe to certain topics. Now, it doesn't have the ability to create RSS feeds for searches or such as multi-tag searches. If you search for 2 tags, there won't be a feed, which is too bad, but at least for kind of big picture tag topics like, say, iOS 15, you'll be able, or a particular API, you'll be able to create an RSS feed for that. That to me was kind of the the most interesting thing. But there's other things there in terms of way to kind of slice and dice the information, and a lot of it's around tags this year.
Nice. Yeah, that should be more convenient to follow, especially if you, like me, are going to need to check out what developers think of the latest versions of iOS and iPadOS. So that seems convenient. Speaking of iOS, and iPadOS version 14.6 was released this week. This is a smaller release, and it basically only contains the new Apple Card family stuff, which I cannot use in Italy, and support for Apple Podcasts subscriptions, which I thought they were going to be available by now, but I haven't seen them yet in the podcast app.
No, I went looking. I specifically went looking. They're not there. And Apple said May, and they've got a few more days, maybe Monday.
All right. So my theory is Monday. So on Monday, they are going to do. So here's my theory. Monday, Apple Podcast subscriptions, they start showing up in the podcast app. And Tuesday, so June 1st, we see Apple Music lossless. That would be my theory.
Okay, that's a good theory.
Well, I'll tell you that last night, and I was only able to make this happen once, I opened the Olivia Rodrigo album, Sour, in Apple Music.
Right.
And for like 2 seconds, the icons for spatial audio and lossless, they flashed on screen, and then they disappeared.
Really? Interesting.
I was never able to get those back.
I have not seen that yet.
But I'm running the, the release candidate version of 14.7. So my theory is that Apple Podcast subscriptions on 14.6 out on Monday, the music stuff 14.7 either on Tuesday or a few days later. That would be, I really don't think they want to release all of this during the week of WWDC.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me too. All right, Federico, we had a couple of link posts this week, too, that are worth mentioning. One is a link to Joe Rosensteel's review of the new Apple TV 4K. And if people know, Joe has written about the Apple TV many times in the past, and we've linked to him in various places on the site, because he's really, he's got a very critical eye when it comes to the Apple TV. And while I guess it's fair to say he feels as though the Apple TV has a long way to go.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that the TV remote the Siri remote is a lot better, which I tend to agree with Joe on some of this stuff. I'm maybe not quite as negative in a few places, but it's worth looking at because he's really got a good perspective on it. And I think he's right that at the price point that Apple sells the Apple TV, they really deserve to have a real critical eye turned on that product because the expectations are higher when you're charging, 3-4 times what something from Amazon or Google costs. Then also we had a link post from Stephen Hackett, who did a YouTube video comparing the iMac G3 with the M1 iMac. And so Stephen took out one of his remaining, most of his G3 iMacs are sitting in a museum in Dearborn, Michigan now, because he collected them all and donated them to the Henry Ford Museum. But he has still a Tangerine iMac G3, and so he ordered an M1 Mac in orange. So they look kind of this. They have that similar color to them, and he kind of runs down some of the differences, and it's a fun way to kind of see what the evolution of that machine has been from 1998 when it was released to 2021. I enjoyed the video a lot, and it's worth checking out.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Okay, Federico, we had a little bit different issue for MacStories Weekly this week for club members in that you and I both did extension columns,
yes.
And they were kind of both along the lines. I think you and I are kind of in the same place, doing different things, but in a similar headspace about home entertainment and music and video and that kind of thing. And so you had a story. Why don't you tell me a little bit about it? I guess it's a continuation of your DAC experiments.
Yes. I received the new USB DAC that I teased last week. So this is the name is kind of a mouthful. It's the XD05BAL. It stands for balanced. So this is a USB DAC made by a Chinese company called XDuo. And look, you go to the website, it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. A lot of these Chinese companies, they don't put a lot of care into the marketing materials. Basically, the websites, they are,
right.
Sometimes they're not responsive or the images are low resolution, that kind of approach. But I did a lot of research on this DAC, and I checked out a lot of reviews from some of my favorite sort of audiophile websites, and it looked exactly like the kind of accessory that I wanted. So I shared all the details and a bunch of photos in MacStories Weekly, but the idea is that this is a DAC that has 2 USB-C ports, so you can use one for charging and one for USB-C pass-through of audio. It's got a 4.4 millimeter jack, which I can use for my Sony balanced headphones. And the most important part, it comes with a built-in OLED display. It's a tiny display that shows you in real time the sampling rate that it's being passed over to the DAC from an external source of audio, like an iPad, for example, or an iPhone. And I really wanted to have that feature so that I could very easily double check what kind of quality I was streaming at. And all of this is in preparation for Apple Music, lossless and high-res lossless, as well as Spotify Hi-Fi, which is in theory coming soon. So I feel like I now have a much better setup for connecting both my iPhone and my iPad to the DAC, but just using a single USB-C cable. So all the details and links for that will be in the extension post on MacStories Weekly.
All right. That sounds really interesting. I took a look at those pictures that you did, and that looks like a really nice DAC. I looked at it and I thought, I'm not going to think about this too hard because I've got enough things on my purchase list thanks to my own extension column, which is all about my home entertainment setup in my living room. And the fact that I've been kind of thrown into this position of uncertainty with the discontinuation of the HomePod in particular, but also the discontinuation of the Harmony remotes, which is something I've relied on for a long time. I've got one of the Harmony Hub remotes, and the extension column itself is all about how I have an older LED TV as well as an older receiver. I don't have support for things like HDMI 2.1 or Dolby Atmos, and I really want an OLED TV. But the first things first, and there's a series of steps I'm working my way towards, which is ultimately replacing the TV. But for right now, I have an older receiver, and while it doesn't support things for video like Dolby Atmos, it still is connected to some really nice speakers, but it doesn't support Bluetooth or AirPlay or anything like that. So I picked up the Belkin Soundform Connect, which is a dongle that you can connect into a receiver, and it will turn it into an AirPlay 2 compatible receiver, and it works incredibly well. It even has a digital optical audio out, so I can pass the highest quality sound possible into the receiver, and then the receiver just sends it out to the speakers. So that experiment, that's step one. Step two is going to be some lossless experiments that I'm doing with that same receiver and speaker setup. And then ultimately, I'm going to get around to the TV. And what's going to drive that, I think, it's a race between the Sony PS5 and whether I can get one, and whether Nintendo puts out a new Switch. One of those two things is going to be what pushes me over the edge, I think, finally. So I'm looking forward to doing that. But the story beyond just being one about experimenting, it's a little bit about what Apple is doing with home entertainment. And I hope we find out something more at WWDC, because I find it a confusing mess right now.
Well, when it comes to TVs, John, I can already tell you cannot get anything less than 120 hertz refresh rate and OLED and HDMI 2.1. So basically what I'm saying is you gotta get one of the latest LG TVs. That's why
I'm going to get I'm going to get either the LG C1 or G1.
There
one of those
go.
two is I've already got them in on my list in Amazon.
Perfect.
So I'm all set. It's just a matter of time.
Perfect.
All right, Federico, tell us a little bit about App Stories this week.
On App Stories this week, we talked about all our wishes for iPadOS 15. So as you can imagine, we have plenty of those, from the Files app, multitasking, shortcuts integration with the system, the home screen, widgets, oh my God, all kinds of things that we want to see in the next version of iPadOS. It's a good one. And our series on what we want to see in Apple's upcoming operating systems is almost complete. We are going to have one last fun and slightly different episode out next week, but in the meantime, if you missed this one, you can listen to all of our iPadOS 15 wishes in episode 220 of App Stories.
All right, Federico, I want to tell you about this week's sponsor, and that is HabitMinder. HabitMinder is a habit tracking app, and it can be really difficult to form a good habit, but if you do, it can really change your life. And making it easy is the hard part, but that's what HabitMinder is fantastic at. It's the best way to get started and stick with a new habit. It starts with the Today view, which is a comprehensive overview of all the habits that you're tracking and provides quick access to actions to log information. With the tap of a habit, you can go straight to a dedicated session screen too, which gives you all kinds of additional information about your progress. And you can personalize your habits by changing their colors and icons too. Stay on track by setting reminders for yourself so you'll never forget about a new goal. There's a dedicated statistics screen that lets you track your progress too. HabitMinder is built for the iPhone, iPad, and Apple Watch, which makes it easy to log and track your goals no matter what device you have with you. The app also works with Apple's Health, keeping your data private and secure and syncing across iCloud too, so it's on every device that you own. Habits are hard to form, but whether it's hydration, exercise, eating right, or something else, good habits can lead to meaningful change. So whatever your goal, go to habitminder.com to learn more and download the app. Our thanks to HabitMinder for their support of the show. All right, Federico, it's time for our Unwind picks. What do you have for me? I know this is a classic pick. This is what I would call a classic Teachy pick.
I have not one pick, not two, 3 picks, 3 movies, John. Well, it's a trilogy.
Wow.
It's a trilogy. So this is one of those moments where I cannot believe how Sylvia and I we never watched these movies before. Like how
Wait, did you just recently watch these?
Yeah, like this week.
Really? Wow.
That's why I'm picking them.
Oh my gosh.
So
I thought you must have watched these ages ago.
Oh,
this
no.
is right up your alley.
I know. It's such a this is our kind of thing. It's the Pitch Perfect trilogy of movies.
Right.
So yeah, I guess the first movie came out in 2012 or something. Like it's been around. It's been around for a while. So the Pitch Perfect movie trilogy, you can stream the first one at least in Italy on Netflix. Otherwise, you can get the trilogy on iTunes, and you can get the trilogy for the price of what would otherwise be a single movie. So it's very convenient. I purchased the whole thing for like $15. Pitch Perfect. It's a movie about an a cappella group. The first movie, which I think is the best one in the series, but the later ones are also very good. The first movie is set in college, and basically it's about this a cappella, all-female a cappella group called the Barton Bellas, and it's very fun because there's a lot of dancing, there's a lot of singing. Obviously, everything is done a cappella. There's competition between different a cappella groups. There's a lot of choreography involved, and all of the actors are really talented. So there's obviously there's Anna Kendrick would be the main character of the Pitch Perfect trilogy, but there's also Rebel Wilson in the first couple of movies. There's Skylar Astin. He also plays Max in Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, which is another previous Unwind pick. So it's really this is extremely my kind of movie.
It really is.
Light-hearted comedy, initially set in college, then later in, not in college anymore, about music, about dancing, about a cappella singing. Yeah, this is my kind of stuff.
Well, I know it's your kind of stuff, and you've left me shocked on a Friday, Federico, because I could swear that you've told me in the past that you've watched this, and I didn't. I must have just imagined it, because we've talked in the past about how you and my wife Jennifer have very similar tastes in movies. This is one of her favorite trilogies, and I would never have thought to recommend it to you, because I would have thought you have already discovered it in the last, whatever it's been, 8 or 9 years since the first one came out. But good pick though. It's a great movie, so check it out. And I think it's one of Anna Kendrick's earlier. I mean, it's not her earliest movies, but it's one I think that really put her on a lot of people's radar. So my pick this week is a new Apple TV Plus show that's been running for a few weeks now called The Mosquito Coast. And I've really enjoyed this show. I've seen people kind of compare it a little bit to Breaking Bad. It's not quite that sort of thing, but It's, I guess it has a similar vibe. It's a family that's living kind of off the grid in California. And there's a mystery because all of a sudden they've been discovered by some government related group, and they're being hunted down. And so I'm not going to give away too much, but they kind of get thrown out of their quiet off the grid life in California and are suddenly on the run. And the show doesn't explain to you exactly why that is, but they find themselves very quickly, in Mexico and dealing with drug lords and all sorts of things. Yeah, and it's got a lot of action. It's got a lot of mystery. It's so far it's been really good. It was one of those that it came out at the beginning of May, I believe, with 3 episodes, and it's been 2 or 3 weeks since it got started. So I've been watching it every Friday and have been loving it. So I'm not sure how many total episodes there are going to be, but they're about 6 in. So if you get started now, they're about 45 minutes to an hour each. So I think starting now would be a good place because depending on how many you watch in a sitting, you could probably get through it at your own pace for the most part by just starting now and then picking up the new ones as the final few start coming out. But it's a great show.
Very nice. Okay.
All right, Federico, that's all for this week on MacStories Unwind. We're getting close to WWDC, so we're going to have lots and lots to talk about very, very soon. And we'll, I think what we'll do during the week of WWDC, we'll probably put MacStories Unwind out on Saturday. I believe we did that last year. Yeah, and that worked really well, both for our own personal sanity, but also because with an extra day to absorb everything, it's a good way to wrap up the entire conference. So stay tuned for that. We'll be back, of course, next week, right on the eve of the conference as well. You can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. Federico is at Viticci on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.